Captain Markuschan had seen enough alien worlds to know when he was walking into a trap, but the crystal spires of Zephyria Prime still took his breath away. The Valdorian Empire's crown jewel stretched before him like something from a fever dream, all flowing architecture and impossible geometries that seemed to bend light itself. His diplomatic escort, a tall blue-skinned Valdorian with 4 arms and eyes like liquid mercury, maintained the same cold silence that had marked their entire journey from the spaceport. The human delegation had been summoned here under the pretense of trade negotiations, but Marcus knew better. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Valdorian Empire, and, since then, every interaction had been carefully orchestrated to demonstrate human inferiority. The aliens possessed technology that made human achievements look like children's toys, lifespans that stretched across centuries, and psychic abilities that could crush a man's mind without effort. Now Marcus found himself walking through corridors lined with guards whose weapons could disintegrate matter at the molecular level, heading toward an audience with Princess Lyralii, heir to an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The other human diplomats in his party, Ambassador Williams and trade specialist Rodriguez, looked as uncomfortable as he felt. They had been briefed extensively on Valdorian customs, warned about the intricate social hierarchies, and given strict instructions on proper etiquette. The throne room opened before them like a cathedral of living light. Bioluminescent vines wove through crystalline walls, casting shifting patterns that seemed to respond to the emotions of those within. At the center, on a throne carved from a single massive gem, sat Princess Lyralii. She was young by Valdorian standards, perhaps only 80 years old, but her bearing spoke of absolute authority. Her skin held a faint lavender hue, and her silver hair floated around her shoulders as if suspended in water. Most striking were her eyes, a deep violet that seemed to hold the depth of space itself. Surrounding the throne stood the court, dozens of Valdorian nobles whose very presence radiated power. Marcus could feel their psychic energy pressing against his mind like a weight, a constant reminder of humanity's mental fragility compared to these beings. The court's robes shimmered with embedded technology that would have represented decades of human research, worn as casually as jewelry. Ambassador Williams stepped forward and began the ritualistic greeting they had rehearsed countless times. His words echoed in the vast space, formal and respectful, acknowledging the Empire's greatness and humanity's desire for peaceful coexistence. The princess listened with the kind of polite attention one might give to a child's recitation, her expression revealing nothing. When Williams finished, Princess Lyralii spoke, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in their bones. She welcomed the human delegation with words that were technically gracious but carried undertones of condescension that made Marcus's jaw clench. She spoke of humanity's quaint achievements, their amusing attempts at space travel, and their endearing persistence despite their obvious limitations. The negotiations that followed were a masterclass in diplomatic humiliation. Every human proposal was met with gentle correction, every term politely revised to favor the Empire. The Valdorians offered technology that was generations ahead of anything humans possessed, but the price was steep, requiring exclusive access to human worlds, restrictions on human expansion, and acknowledgement of Valdorian superiority. Marcus watched his colleagues struggle with the terms, saw the defeat creeping into their eyes. This was not negotiation, it was submission wrapped in the veneer of diplomacy. The princess and her court clearly viewed humans as little more than an interesting curiosity, perhaps useful as a client species but never as equals. As the hours dragged on, Marcus found his patience wearing thin. He had served in the colonial marines before joining the diplomatic corps, had fought in battles where human courage and determination had overcome impossible odds. He had seen what humans could accomplish when pushed to their limits, had witnessed the kind of stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried their species from caves to the stars. The breaking point came when Advisor Kellyan, a particularly pompous courtier with skin like polished obsidian, made a casual comment about humanity's genetic limitations and suggested that perhaps the Empire should consider selective breeding programs to improve the species over time. The words were delivered with the same tone one might use to discuss livestock improvement, and Marcus felt something snap inside him. He stood abruptly, ignoring the startled looks from his colleagues and the sudden tension that rippled through the court. The guards' hands moved to their weapons, and he could feel the psychic pressure increase as the nobles focused their attention on him. But Marcus didn't care. He had reached his limit with their condescension, their casual dismissal of human worth, their assumption that technological superiority meant inherent superiority. The princess raised a hand, staying the guards, her violet eyes fixed on Marcus with newfound interest. There was something in her gaze, a spark of curiosity that hadn't been there before. She gestured for him to speak, and Marcus realized that this might be his only chance to say something that mattered. He took a deep breath and made a choice that would change everything. Instead of the diplomatic platitudes he had been trained to deliver, instead of the careful words designed to avoid offense, Marcus decided to speak a truth that every human understood but no alien had ever heard. He would voice the words that his people lived by but rarely spoke aloud, the philosophy that had driven their species from the caves to the stars despite every obstacle the universe had thrown at them. The throne room fell silent as Marcus prepared to speak words that would either doom humanity's relationship with the Empire or change it forever. He could see the princess leaning forward slightly, her attention completely focused on him, as if she sensed that something significant was about to happen. The court held its collective breath, psychic energy crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. What Marcus didn't know was that his next words would violate the most fundamental taboo in Valdorian culture, challenge beliefs that had remained unchallenged for millennia, and awaken something in Princess Lyralii that would shake the very foundations of the Empire. Marcus looked directly into Princess Lyralii's violet eyes and spoke words that had never been uttered in this palace, words that challenged the very foundation of Valdorian society. Your Highness, with respect, I believe you are wrong about humanity. We don't seek your approval or validation because we don't need it. We've never needed it. Every species we've encountered has tried to tell us what we cannot do, what we should not attempt, what limits we should accept. And, every time, we've proven them wrong, not through superior technology or psychic powers, but through something you cannot measure or understand. The silence that followed was deafening. Several courtiers gasped audibly, their psychic emanations spiking with shock and outrage. Advisor Kellyan's obsidian skin darkened further, and Marcus could feel waves of indignation rolling off the assembled nobles. But Princess Lyralii remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on his, and he could swear he saw something flicker in their depths, something that might have been intrigue. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. You measure everything by technological advancement, by psychic ability, by lifespan and physical capability. But you miss the most important thing. You miss what makes us human. We don't give up. Ever. When the universe tells us something is impossible, we find a way to make it possible. When faced with extinction, we evolve. When confronted with overwhelming odds, we fight anyway, not because we expect to win, but because surrender is not in our nature. The princess's hand had tightened on her throne's armrest, and Marcus noticed a slight tremor in her fingers. Around the room, the bioluminescent vines were pulsing faster, responding to the emotional turmoil of those present. Several guards had taken half steps forward, but the princess's other hand held them back with a subtle gesture. You speak of our limitations as if they define us, Marcus pressed on, knowing he was walking a razor's edge but unable to stop. But our limitations are what forge us into something stronger. Yes, we live shorter lives than you, but that makes every moment precious. Yes, we lack psychic abilities, but that taught us to rely on each other, to build bonds that transcend the mind. Yes, our technology is primitive compared to yours, but we built it ourselves, from nothing, through trial and error and countless failures. Ambassador Williams was making frantic gestures for Marcus to stop, but he ignored them. He had crossed the point of no return, and something told him that this moment, this honest confrontation, was more important than any carefully worded treaty. You've had everything handed to you by previous generations, inherited power and knowledge that you never had to earn. But, humans? We've earned every single step forward through blood, sweat, and determination. When our homeworld was threatened by environmental collapse, we didn't just adapt, we learned to heal it. When we reached the limits of our solar system, we didn't accept those limits, we broke them. When told that faster-than-light travel was impossible, we made it possible. Princess Lyralii was breathing faster now, and Marcus could see a flush spreading across her lavender skin. The tremor in her hands had become more pronounced, and her eyes held an intensity that made him wonder if he had miscalculated catastrophically. Every challenge has made us stronger, he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast throne room. Every setback has taught us something new. Every defeat has been temporary because we refuse to accept permanent failure. That is what you cannot understand, what your empire with all its power and longevity has forgotten. The strength that comes from struggling, from failing and getting back up, from facing the impossible and doing it anyway. The court exploded into chaos. Nobles were shouting in their melodious language, their psychic emanations clashing like storm fronts. Some called for Marcus to be arrested for blasphemy, others demanded his immediate execution for insulting the royal person. The guards looked ready to act, their weapons humming with deadly energy. But Princess Lyralii stood suddenly, her movement cutting through the noise like a blade. The court fell silent instantly, all eyes turning to her. She was trembling now, visibly shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. For a moment, Marcus thought she might collapse, and he wondered if his words had somehow harmed her. Then, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the acoustics of the throne room. "Guards, escort the other humans to their quarters. I wish to speak with Captain Chen alone." The protest from the court was immediate and vociferous. Advisor Kellyan stepped forward, his forearms spread in supplication. "Your Highness, this human has clearly gone mad. His words border on treason against the natural order." "Surely you cannot mean to," I said alone. The princess's voice carried a note of command that brooked no argument. The psychic pressure in the room shifted, and Marcus felt the full weight of her authority. Despite her youth, she was still a royal of the Valdorian Empire, and, when she chose to exercise her power, even the most senior nobles obeyed. The court filed out reluctantly, shooting dark looks at Marcus as they passed. His fellow diplomats were escorted away by guards, Williams throwing him a look that promised a very unpleasant conversation later. Soon, the vast throne room was empty except for Marcus, the princess, and 2 guards stationed by the entrances. Princess Lyralii sank back onto her throne, her violet eyes never leaving Marcus's face. The trembling in her hands had not subsided, and he could see something warring in her expression, as if his words had triggered an internal struggle. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked finally, her voice still that breathless whisper. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I spoke the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The truth." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only a kind of desperate edge. "You spoke words that have been forbidden in Valdorian society for over 1,000 years. Words that challenge the doctrine of eternal order, that question the very basis of our civilization. Maybe your civilization needs questioning." The princess flinched as if he had struck her, but she didn't order his arrest. Instead, she leaned forward, studying his face intently. "Tell me something, Captain Chen. In your research of our people, did you encounter any reference to the Valdorian concept of Kethvar?" Marcus searched his memory of the briefings. The term was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I don't think so. What does it mean?" "It translates roughly to the flame that dies fighting. It was once considered the highest virtue a Valdorian could possess, the willingness to struggle against impossible odds, to refuse surrender even in the face of certain defeat. It was the driving force that built our early civilization, that pushed us to the stars, that forged us into an empire." She stood and began to pace, her movements agitated, as if his words had awakened something that had been sleeping. "But, as our power grew, as our technology advanced, as our lifespans extended, the concept of Kethvar became inconvenient. Why struggle when you possess overwhelming superiority? Why fight when you can simply impose your will? The philosophers declared it a primitive concept, a relic of our barbarous past. It was forbidden to speak of it, forbidden to teach it, forbidden even to remember it." Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "But, you remember it." "I remember fragments, whispers, half-forgotten lessons from my childhood tutor before the court discovered her corrupting influence and had her exiled." The princess's voice carried pain now, old wounds reopened. "I have spent decades wondering what we might have lost when we abandoned that path, what we might have become if we had kept that fire burning instead of smothering it with comfort and certainty." She stopped pacing and faced him directly. "And then, you walk into my court and speak of these things as if they are not only possible but essential. You describe a species that embodies everything Kethvar represented, that has built an entire civilization on the principle that struggle creates strength rather than weakness." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had not just violated a taboo, he had awakened something that the Valdorian establishment had spent centuries trying to bury. And he had done it in front of the Empire's future ruler. Princess Lyralii moved closer to Marcus, her violet eyes blazing with an intensity that made the air between them seem to crackle. Her trembling had evolved into something else, a kind of electric energy that reminded him of a caged predator suddenly, remembering it had claws. "Show me," she said, her voice urgent and demanding. "Show me what this human struggle looks like. Not in words, not in philosophy, but in action. I want to understand what Kethvar truly means." Before Marcus could respond, the throne room doors burst open. Advisor Kellyan strode in, flanked by a dozen guards and several high-ranking nobles. His obsidian features were twisted with fury and what looked like genuine fear. "Your Highness, this madness must end immediately." The human's words have already begun spreading through the palace. The younger nobles are asking dangerous questions, and some of the servant classes are showing signs of unrest. This poison must be contained before it spreads further. Princess Lyralii straightened, and Marcus saw the royal bearing reassert itself. But, underneath the formal posture, he could sense the fire he had helped kindle still burning. "Advisor Kellyan, you forget yourself. I am perfectly capable of conducting a conversation without your supervision. With respect, Your Highness, you are young and, perhaps do not fully understand the implications of what has transpired here. The human has committed an act of cultural terrorism, spreading concepts that threaten the very stability of our society. He must be silenced, and these ideas must be purged before they can take root." Marcus felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The princess's psychic emanation shifted, and, suddenly, the bioluminescent vines along the walls flared bright enough to cast harsh shadows. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made his bones vibrate. "Cultural terrorism, advisor? Is that what we call independent thought now? Is questioning our assumptions such a threat that it requires silencing?" The noble courtiers exchanged nervous glances. This was clearly not going according to their plan. Kellyan, however, pressed forward, his forearms gesturing emphatically. "Your Highness, the doctrine of eternal order has maintained peace and prosperity for over a millennium. The old ways, the chaotic ways that this human advocates, led only to suffering and instability. We have evolved beyond such primitive needs." "Have we?" The princess stepped down from her throne, moving with a predatory grace that made the guards shift nervously. "Or have we simply grown soft and complacent? Tell me, advisor, when was the last time our empire faced a true challenge? When did we last accomplish something that required genuine effort rather than simply applying overwhelming force?" Kellyan's skin darkened further. "Your Highness, such questions are dangerous?" Princess Lyralii laughed, and the sound was sharp as breaking crystal. "Yes, they are. They're dangerous to a system built on the assumption that comfort and superiority are the highest goals a civilization can achieve." She turned to Marcus, and he saw something in her eyes that sent a thrill of both excitement and terror through him. She had made a decision, and he suspected it was one that would change everything. "Captain Chen, you spoke of human determination in the face of impossible odds. I want to see it demonstrated. I challenge you to single combat, here and now, before this court." The assembled nobles gasped in unison. Kellyan took a step back, his forearms spreading in shock. "Your Highness, this is madness. A human cannot possibly match a Valdorian warrior, especially one of royal blood. The contest would be over in seconds." Princess Lyralii smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Exactly. Overwhelming odds, certain defeat, no rational hope of victory. Perfect conditions to test this human concept of refusing to surrender." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. He had wanted to demonstrate human determination, but this was not what he had in mind. Princess Lyralii possessed all the advantages of her species: enhanced strength, psychic abilities, and combat training that likely spanned decades. In a fair fight, she would dismantle him without effort. But, then, he realized that was exactly the point. This wasn't about winning, it was about showing what humans did when winning was impossible. "I accept," he said, ignoring the horrified looks from the nobles. "What are the terms?" First to yield or lose consciousness, the princess replied. No weapons, no armor, no assistance. Simply warrior against warrior. The throne room was quickly rearranged to create a fighting space. Word spread rapidly through the palace, and, within minutes, spectators began filing in. Marcus found himself facing a crowd of hundreds, all come to witness what they clearly expected to be a brief and decisive demonstration of human inadequacy. Princess Lyralii had changed into form-fitting combat attire that displayed both her alien grace and the lean muscle beneath her lavender skin. She moved through warm-up exercises with fluid precision, each movement economical and deadly. Her psychic aura was visible now, a faint violet shimmer that surrounded her like heat haze. Marcus stripped to his uniform undershirt and tried to center himself. He had trained in multiple martial arts during his Marine service, but all of that felt inadequate against what he was about to face. Still, he had meant what he said about human determination, and this was his chance to prove it. The combat began with Princess Lyralii testing his defenses, quick strikes that he barely managed to deflect or avoid. Her speed was inhuman, and each blow carried enough force to shatter bone. Within the first minute, Marcus was bleeding from a cut above his eye and struggling to breathe. The crowd murmured appreciatively as the princess demonstrated textbook Valdorian combat techniques, but Marcus noticed something interesting. She was holding back, not using her psychic abilities, fighting him as if he were a worthy opponent rather than simply crushing him outright. He lasted longer than anyone expected, 5 minutes, then 10. His defense was ragged and desperate, but he kept getting back up every time she knocked him down. Blood ran from his nose, his ribs ached from impacts, and his vision was starting to blur, but he refused to yield. Why do you continue? Princess Lyralii asked during a brief pause, her breathing only slightly elevated while Marcus gasped for air. You cannot win. You must know this is futile. Marcus wiped blood from his mouth and grinned. That's exactly why I continue. Because it's futile. Because it's impossible. Because every rational voice in my head is telling me to quit. He straightened, raising his guard again. But humans don't listen to rational voices when they're telling us to give up. Something changed in the princess's expression. The clinical precision of her attacks gave way to something more personal, more urgent. She began pressing harder, using more of her natural abilities, but Marcus adapted, finding ways to use her superior strength against her, turning her speed into liability through unexpected timing. The fight became something else entirely. What had started as a demonstration of human futility transformed into a display of something the Valdorians had forgotten they once possessed. The crowd grew silent, watching in fascination as Marcus embodied the ancient concept of Kethvar, the flame that died fighting but refused to be extinguished. 20 minutes in, when Marcus should have been unconscious or dead, he was still standing. Battered, bloodied, and clearly outmatched, but still fighting. The princess's attacks had become more frenzied, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle that refused to yield to conventional solutions. Then, in a moment that surprised everyone including himself, Marcus managed to land a solid hit, catching the princess off guard and sending her staggering backward. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, and Marcus saw something extraordinary happen. Princess Lyralii touched her lip where his punch had connected, looked at the small smear of violet blood on her finger, and began to laugh. Not the bitter laugh from before, but something joyous and free, as if she had just discovered something precious that she had thought lost forever. Enough, she called out, raising her hand to stop the combat. I yield. The silence that followed was absolute. A Valdorian princess, heir to a galactic empire, had yielded to a human who by all rights should have been unconscious minutes ago. You yield? Advisor Kellyan's voice cracked with disbelief. Your Highness, surely you cannot mean I yield, she repeated firmly, her eyes still locked on Marcus's. Because I have learned something important today. Something that our empire desperately needs to remember. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Today I fought a human warrior who had no hope of victory, who faced impossible odds with no rational expectation of success. And, in that hopeless fight, I saw something we have lost. I saw the fire that once drove our people to greatness, the refusal to accept limitation, the determination to keep fighting even when fighting seems pointless. The assembled nobles stirred uneasily, but the princess continued. Captain Chen has shown us what we gave up when we chose comfort over challenge, superiority over struggle. He has reminded us of Kethvar, and, in doing so, has given us the greatest gift possible. He has shown us who we used to be, and who we might become again. She walked over to Marcus and extended her hand. When he took it, she helped him to his feet and spoke words that would echo through the Empire for generations to come. From this day forward, humanity will not be treated as a client species or inferior race. They will be recognized as our equals, our teachers in the art of never surrendering. And I propose that we have much to learn from each other. The implications of her words rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Some nobles looked horrified, others intrigued, but all understood that everything had just changed. The careful hierarchy that had defined Valdorian society for a millennium had been challenged by a human who refused to stay down and a princess who remembered what it meant to struggle. As Marcus stood there, bloodied but victorious in a way that transcended mere combat, he realized that his taboo words had done more than shock the court. They had awakened something that had been sleeping in the heart of the Empire, something that might just save both their species from the stagnation that came with unchallenged supremacy. The revolution that followed would be remembered as the Great Awakening, when the Valdorian Empire rediscovered its forgotten strength and humanity found its place among the stars not as subordinates, but as partners in the endless struggle to grow, to learn, and to never, ever give up.